Welcome back to Life's a Beach Mental and Emotional Health Podcast. My name's Miranda and I'm your host. Today we'll be discussing our Employee Assistance Program. As of January 1st, 2023, Optima Employee Assistance Program, or Optima EAP for short, is our new program provider. And we are excited to learn all about their services today. We'll talk about what it is, how to access it. I'm excited to be joined today by Suzanne Fullwood with Optima EAP. She's here to provide an overview of the program, and we're going to get into a little discussion about employee assistance programs. Suzanne, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to our viewers.
Thank you, Miranda. Again, my name is Suzanne Fullwood, and I am the client executive for the Optima EAP program on the eastern part of the state. We're excited, and we thank you for this opportunity.
You're welcome. Suzanne, to get started today, can you share with our viewers just a brief overview of what an employee assistance program is and what kind of services does it offer?
Sure. The EAP program is a resource that helps employees to overcome some of life's challenges. The analogy that I always use is the whack-a-mole. You get one thing down, something else crops up, and it's constant. And we want the employees to know that they're not alone, and it shows a sign of emotional maturity to be able to recognize when you need the help, where you get the help, and how to get it. So that's why the EAP program is here.
So it sounds like employees and members of their household can access EAP services for the everyday things that we all go through. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me what exactly are the services when they reach out? What is available to them?
Okay, so for the employees, they get 5 visits per topic. Pretty much you can talk to our clinicians about a lot of things, but for things like anger and stress, dependency, grief and loss, building relationships, things like that. It's not only for the employees, for the employee and everybody in their household, but let me clarify that. When you say that, we mean that if the employee has people in their household that have their address as the permanent address, then they qualify for the EAP program.
Okay, so anybody living with you, they don't have to be actually like family members.
Correct.
Could be like a roommate.
Correct.
Or what about when I was away at college, I used my home address as my mailing address. Mm-hmm. So that would be, even though I'm not living there,
right,
I'm still a member of that household.
Correct.
So how would an employee or a member of their household go about accessing these services? Okay. What should they do?
It's as simple as calling the 1-800 number, Miranda. Once they make the calls are usually answered within 60 to 90 seconds. And then the operations team member would actually set up the appointment for the employee. Usually, if they will take the first available, you can get in probably within 72 hours. However, if you start putting criteria and specifics with it, like your schedule doesn't work or something like that, it may take a little while longer, but we will get you in.
When you put it like that, it sounds like such an easy process, right?
Yes.
But we do know that oftentimes people do delay getting help or may not end up getting help because of a negative perception on what it means to seek out that help. You know, in their mind, EAP services are just for somebody who has been mandated to go by their manager or maybe, strongly encouraged, depending on what they're going through, to reach out for that help. So overcoming that negative perception, that stigma on seeking out mental health services in general, but specifically for EAP, can be a big barrier to getting EAP services. What are some other misperceptions that you've come across?
Well, the biggest one you said, Miranda, was the stigma. A lot of people don't want to go and get the help that they need. Like I tell people all the time, a lot of times when we are going through things, we go to our friends and our family members. And what do? Because they don't know what to say, they pacify us. Whereas if you go to a clinician, they may say, you know what, Ms. Fullwood, let's get you in and let's talk. The stigma is the biggest thing. And that's part of my role when I'm out talking to my groups, is to try to let them know that it's okay. Again, it's a level of emotional maturity to recognize when something is going on. The second thing is confidentiality. A lot of people are concerned. They'll say, Ms. Fullwood, I am not going to EAP because, my business will be strewn all over the place.
Right.
When we're governed by state and federal laws, and we cannot share your information. My mother used to say the only way that your business can be told is if you tell it. You don't have to worry about us. And then the third thing is just not really understanding what EAP is. Right. I admit those 3 letters together, EAP, may not mean too much. That's my responsibility to make people aware of what it is. And the thing is, too, Miranda, is that people just think that EAP is about clinical. It is so much more. We have clinical, we have training, we have information for critical incidents, stress management types events. We have all types of services. We have a new Worklife service, and we'll talk about that later. Yeah, but again, a lot of people think that EAP is just for clinical, and it's not.
That's right. So that's why we wanted to have you on our show today. We wanted to kind of unpack the EAP program and, really address some of the concerns that our employees might have with reaching out. I'm glad you mentioned confidentiality. We don't know when employees reach out. It's not going to get back to your boss. So that confidentiality is a great comfort, I know, for some reaching out. And I know you also mentioned accessibility in as far as, how soon it will take to get an appointment. Those are some common things that I noticed amongst what you said was accessibility, how will my care be coordinated, if I need more assistance than what is offered, and then, what is the quality of my care, who will I be speaking with, and how will my call be handled. So I hope we can touch on each one of those topics on our episode today. And let's go ahead and unpack that a little bit, starting out with accessibility. So you mentioned the turnaround time for receiving an appointment once an employee calls. So how does that work? Does the employer receive like a list of providers that they'll need to contact, or are they just connected with how does that process work?
Okay. So again, you call the 1-800 number, and our operations team will actually set the first appointment for you.
Oh, okay.
Yes, ma'am. And so, the thing is that it usually takes from the time the phone rings to the time that the operations team answers the phone is like 60 to 90 seconds. All right. As far as the visits are concerned, we try to get everybody in within the first 72 hours. But again, keeping in mind that if you take the first appointment that is available, you'll probably get it in within that 72 hours. But again, once you start looking at certain criteria, the time that, you can't come in before 4 or 5:30, because, our visits are Monday through Friday from 8 to 5. Okay. And then we have after hours. But sometimes people's schedules, they don't get off until 5 o'clock. Right. So that could possibly extend the time out that you could get an appointment.
Okay. Yeah, I know in the past that turnaround time has been a major concern for our employees, getting over that, maybe the anxiety of reaching out, that delay between that initial call and then when you can actually speak with somebody can really turn some people off to receiving that help. So that's good to know that, depending on your availability, you possibly could be seen up to 72 hours from that initial call, which is not long at all. So you mentioned Monday to Friday between the hours of 8 and 5. Those are the clinician's hours? Or is that also the call center hours?
Well, it's the call center hours and the clinician's hours. However, we tell people that, or the employees rather, that if they get into a crisis mode after hours, we still want them to call the 1-800 number, and then they would be connected with our after hours nurses. Okay. And then they are qualified for EAP type visits also. And then if you still need additional help, we do have our clinicians that are on duty 24 hours a day. So the only thing that we really can't handle, Miranda, are the suicide calls. Our operations team is trained to pick up on certain connotations in the voice, certain things that are said. They're trained for that. And they'll ask the employee, are you in a crisis mode? If they are in a crisis mode, then they'll be warm transferred immediately to a clinician. So, the thing is that the training is important. Right. The training is important because you have to know your clients. Even though you don't know them, you have to be able to pick up on signs through the phone.
Absolutely. So when calling the after hours, if you're in crisis mode, it sounds like you can get connected with somebody immediately. If I were calling after work, let's say to set up an appointment with a counselor, would I be able to do that on that phone call, or how would that call be handled?
Well, what they would do is they would go ahead and do an assessment of the call, and then they would send us an email that maybe an employee needs to be set up with an appointment. So it can still work that way.
So that appointment would happen maybe the next business day when that email is received?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Unless it's a crisis call.
Unless it's a crisis. Is there anything, Suzanne, that Optima EAP does that makes their services more accessible to members?
Oh, yes. We're able to do visits face-to-face. We just started that back January 11th, I think it was, because of COVID.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
We do it virtually. You can do it telephonically, or you can do it from your iPad. So that, we give the employees a lot of options, because you can go into a conference room, a car, wherever you can get confidentiality and you can get the internet, you're able to do your services.
That's great that you have the option to be connected with a counselor in a way that maybe you're most comfortable with. So maybe somebody's not comfortable over the phone or in a conference room, they want to meet in person, they can do that. Or if they wanted that virtual appointment so that they don't have to travel, they could stay right in their own home.
And we're seeing a lot of people, like the virtual better because I could stay at home and be on the couch with my puppy and have my session and not have to go anywhere. So we see more and more of that.
Absolutely. So I know for me, when I'm getting ready to do something that I've never done before, thinking about from the mindset of somebody calling EAP and they've never done it before, what helps me is to gather as much information about the process as possible. So recently my son had surgery and the doctor shared a video with us of what to expect. And watching that video and knowing exactly how things would happen, and they did work out just like that video, it definitely helped to calm a lot of my nerves, and I had a lot less anxiety about his surgery, which went really well, by the way. But I was thinking that maybe we could walk through some examples of why you might reach out to EAP and walk through what that process would look like. I know we've already kind of gone through the process, but I feel like that repetition and as much information as possible that we can share with our viewers will be helpful for, in the time that they might need to reach out. They'll know exactly what to expect.
Well, I'll just use myself as an example. About 6 years ago, both of my parents passed away within 30 days of each other.
Wow.
Well, 47 days of each other. And at that time, Miranda, I knew that I wasn't thinking straight. I had a lot on me. I had become like a lawyer, doctor, preacher, teacher, everything for two extremely ill parents. Yeah. And again, at that time, I just could have easily called out to EAP because that would have been what we call a voluntary referral, meaning that I volunteered to call. There's no paperwork. And again, HR, no one knows that you've made the call. My manager at the time was well aware of everything that I was going through, so she politely came and put a magnet on my desk. And she said, Suzanne, don't forget we have EAP. And then last but not least, if I were grieving today, as I was grieving 6 years ago, then Centera will probably do what we call a mandated referral. And that's a good thing because we never want anybody to know that a mandated referral is a punishment.
Right.
It's a win-win situation. It's a win-win to get me back on track the way that I need to be. And it's also a win-win for the organization because at that time, I need to be productive for the paychecks that I get every 2 weeks. So, again, with the voluntary referral, I could have easily just called the 1-800 number. The operations team are going to ask a few questions, just so they can figure out what organization you're from, what your preferences are if you have any. And then they would set me up with that appointment. We have 5 visits for you all. And so the way that I imagine it, Miranda, is that the first visit, number 1 and 2, you're talking to the clinician, and I'm doing what I call dumping my bucket. I'm telling that clinician everything about everything that's going on. Visit number 3, I'm starting to feel a lot better. The clinician at that time may say, Ms. Fullwood, let's get you back for 2 more visits to make sure you're on track. Because usually statistics states that it takes about 3 visits to get you back on track.
I didn't know that.
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Visit number 5, you should feel a lot better to fly away and be able to handle and manage that challenge. But there are going to be some people that have situations where they're just really, really deep, and 5 visits may not be enough.
Sure.
At that time, you will be turned over to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and that would be against your medical benefits. And you would have a copay, a deductible, or co-insurance. But then also the clinician that you're working with will help you with that transfer because you want to stay in the network. Clinicians can be kind of pricey, in which it's well worth it. But to have a copay, a deductible, or co-insurance is a lot better.
Sure. Thank you, Suzanne, for sharing about your experience.
Sure.
We really appreciate you sharing that with us. I was curious, what are some other examples of why an employee or a member of their household might reach out to use EAP services and to seek out those 5 visits?
A lot of times when I'm out, people constantly share with me their experiences with Optima EAP. They go for things like anger, just being able to manage day to day with just life's challenges. It could be anything from A to Z. But I assure you, every time they talk to me about it, Miranda, it gives them a sense of comfort. The example that I mentioned earlier about being able to talk to your friends and your family, again, they pacify us. And I always say that it's a TPA, a third-party administrator, because that's a person who doesn't know you, he or she doesn't know the situation, and they're able to give you a clinical response. So a lot of people find that to be comforting.
So you mentioned an employee or a member of their household might reach out to EAP for help, managing their anger. So I guess in that scenario, let's kind of walk through it and, talk through the process just so I make sure I understand this correctly. So if I realize that I am struggling with anger and, I want to get help as soon as possible with that before, anything comes out of that, before it escalates, right? Once I realize that I might need some help with this, that would be a good time to call.
Correct.
And, maybe it's not as far along as it could have been, but as soon as you might need some help, that's a good time to reach out. And maybe only 1 visit is all you need to just talk through about what was making you angry. So, for instance, if I was, identifying that in myself, I might need some help with this. finally take a deep breath, and I'm going to be able to just go ahead and dial that number. That's all I have to do.
That's all
Once
you
I've
have to do.
decided that, I might need some help with this, I just got to dial that number. And then what would happen when I reach out to the operations team and they pick up that call? What are they going to say to me? What should I be prepared to say back?
Well, of course, they're going to ask you your name and what organization you're with. They may ask if you are a dependent of the employee, just so that we can make sure that we have everything. And then they may ask you, did you have someone in mind? Because a lot of people sometimes already have a clinician that they're working with.
Okay, so do I have a counselor in mind that I want to speak with?
And if so, then we could either work to get them into our network, or they may already be in our network. So our operations team will go ahead and try to set up that appointment.
Okay.
And again, they set up the first one, but it's up to the employee to set up the subsequent ones.
Okay, so they're going to ask me my name, what organization I work with, if I'm a member or a household member.
Right.
And then, if I already have somebody in mind, so, I guess if I had a friend who was going through counseling and they highly recommended somebody, I could say, well, I have heard about this clinician, and you have all their contact information and you'll be able to reach out. I don't even have to gather that information.
If we don't have the information, we may ask you for the address and contact number. Again, we have a lot of clinicians in our network, but all of them don't participate with EAP for one reason or another. But if we can't get that one in the network, again, we'll try. But if not, we can surely connect you with another one.
All right. So you'll ask me when I'm able to get that visit in, if I have any certain time constraints, and then you'll work on your end, your magic, whatever computer system you use to find out what appointment would work best and in whatever format I was hoping to receive in, whether that's virtual or in person.
Yeah, iPad, telephonic, or face-to-face.
Okay,
but there's one
telephonic.
other thing I want to say too, Miranda. All personalities don't click.
Oh, that's true.
And so if you have a visit with a clinician and your personalities just don't click, please let us know as soon as possible, because what we need to do is to get you connected with someone else. Please don't wait until you're at visit number 3 and then say, well, we're not getting along. Let us know at visit number 1 if you can.
That's good to know. So you don't have to stick with that same person.
Correct.
So if you have that first visit and you decide, maybe, I need to see somebody else, do you get 5 new sessions, or does that first session still count as that 5?
That first one still counts as 5. That's why we say to let us know as soon as possible.
As soon as possible.
Because you don't want to wait to get to number 4 for that particular topic, and then you only have 1 left.
Right. So I do want to talk a little bit more about the quality of care and what kind of qualifications the counselors have. Before we switch gears into that, I did want to ask you what sets Optima EAP apart as far as accessibility goes. I think I remember you mentioning that you guys are a local company. Is that true?
Yes, we are local and we are here. The thing is, Miranda, is that, a lot of carriers offer the EAP program. But again, we're right here in the Virginia Beach office. So we have clinicians statewide, and even if there's an employee that has a child that's in college somewhere else, like in Montana, and they want to use the EAP program, we will still just find them a clinician in that area. But we are here. I mean, for me, as far as we consider ourselves to be high touch. I call my clients every quarter. I know what's going on with my clients. I like to find out things. I don't like to hear things out from the community of something that could have potentially gone wrong. So again, we have materials that we send out. We stay in contact almost weekly. I know you and I talk weekly, but the thing is that we are high touch, and so we stay in contact with our clients constantly.
That's great to know. You guys are local. You are a part of our community. You understand our community. All the way from you guys are local to your operations team. Are the counselors that are a part of the network, are they local as well?
Yes, we have some in staff, but then we have a lot of affiliates, and our clinicians have to be at a master's level. Okay. They have to have a current license, and I think they have to have at least 3 years of outpatient type services with employees. So they're well equipped.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the counselors and their qualifications. So some pretty high standards there. What about the people on your operations teams, those that are answering the phone calls? You did mention that they have, training to be able to assess the callers as they're calling in. What kind of training do they undergo?
I don't know exactly all of the details of it, but I do know that they go through a formal training. Again, everybody can't just answer the phones, okay? You have to have a level of accessibility, knowing what to listen for. Certain things like, I'm just going to use this as an example. If somebody's crying and screaming, how do you diffuse that so that you can at least try to get them the help that they need? You have to determine, do they need help right now? Is it a suicide call? So again, they're trained on certain things to listen for when the customers call.
All right, so they have that specialized training. They're not just going to be collecting your information and passing that on to somebody. They're going to help process, what you're going through and try and get you connected in the best way possible, depending on your situation.
And one thing that I could say, too, about our operations team is they have a heart for the people, if that's the right terminology to say.
Yeah,
they care about every call that comes in. In fact, our whole team has a heart for the people because, when you're dealing with mental health, it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot. And sometimes just hearing somebody's voice, a calm, soothing voice is what can just calm somebody right down.
That's so true. I had a friend share with me just that she had reached out to EAP services and that even just that phone call was all she needed. She didn't even need to set up an appointment, but, being able to share what was going on right then and there and talking through it just helped. So sometimes just having that empathetic person who really does care about what you're going through, listening to you helps as well. Right. I think that, is very comforting to me, personally thinking about if there were a time that I need to reach out that, I'll be able to receive an empathetic ear.
Yes.
And get connected with care and that I will be connected in the best way possible for me. All right, so we talked a little bit about counselors' background and those answering the call in the operations center. Is there anything else about the quality of care that you'll receive when you reach out to EAP services? What sets Optima EAP apart from other EAP providers?
We have a lot to offer, Miranda. There's so much more than just the clinical part, whereas that's the forefront.
And by clinical, you mean like when I reach out and get those 5 sessions with a counselor?
And you meet with the counselor. Again, we go back to the training. We have 61 classes that can be trained. We have an actual training department. We have our EAP clinical manager, and he does assessments. The managers out there are able to call him at any time, within normal hours. But if they have a situation that's occurring and they really don't know how to handle it, they can call and get what we call a management consult.
Okay.
At that time, the clinical manager will say, you know what, why don't we try ABC? Or maybe he may say, let's go ahead and get that mandatory referral in. We have critical incidences. Again, when we say a critical incidence, that means anything that disrupts the behavior of the day-to-day work environment. Once that we see a lot, the death of an employee, because that affects everybody around. Situations that may occur. Anything, again, that disrupts the day-to-day work. Again, we talked about the high touch, us being available. And again, the biggest thing is that we're here.
I think you mentioned this at the beginning of our show when we were talking about, needing more than 5 sessions. But I wanted to make sure we went back and revisited that and how that coordination of care happens when you're going through the EAP process. Because, sometimes you start out, you don't know how many sessions you need to help you work through whatever concern you're presenting. Right. So maybe you get to the end of those 5 sessions and you're like, I think I really could benefit from continuing on. Can you kind of explain that process and how that would work?
Mm-hmm. Depending on the topic, if it's the same topic and you have exhausted your 5 visits, if you wait 60 days, okay, you may be able to get another 5 visits, but I would have to get permission from our director. So that's one way. Again, if it's something that needs a deeper dive, you would then be referred to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. Again, because at that point, sometimes medications have to be administered. A lot of times, sometimes too, Miranda, if an employee comes in and the clinician does an assessment and they determine at visit number 2 that this is going to be a long-term type of concern, they will refer you on. But again, you still have your 5 visits. Usually the clinicians try to get you back on track. And the use of those is very beneficial.
Absolutely.
Very beneficial.
I know, for instance, if you're grieving the loss of a loved one, you might, get to session 5 and there just hasn't been enough time to go through that whole grief process. And you might still need some help going through whatever stage you are encountering next. And if you needed to continue to see maybe that same counselor, how would you coordinate that care? Or how would that be the member that it coordinates that care, or would the counselor help with that process? How does that work?
Yeah, the counselor will help with that process. Again, we want the employee to stay in the network
Okay, so through Optima EAP, I believe you guys have behavioral health. Is that how that would be coordinated through?
Yes.
And then if you're not on the Optima health plan, whichever health plan provider you have, Optima EAP would work with whoever is in your network to get that from your first counselor that you were seeing to your next one. So
They would help with
that
that
would be a
coordination.
smooth transition. So they would help with setting up that appointment with the new counselor.
Well, I don't think they would set up the appointment, but maybe give you some resources. If it's a clinician that's not in our network, then they will probably help to look at what clinicians are in the network and help them to transition over. Because clinicians have relationships also, so they may say, "Well, Suzanne, I know Miss Miranda Morales who's able to do," and then maybe make that reach out to try to help.
Okay. You mentioned that a member could continue to see the same counselor beyond those 5 sessions. How would that transition between EAP services and the health plan services work?
It would be great if the clinician that they are seeing is also on the behavioral health panel, because that would be almost like a seamless, because they would move from the EAP where the sessions are covered at 100% versus now they're moving into a copay deductible or coinsurance. But the great thing is that, we have a behavioral health department and they have providers. They have more than enough providers out there to try to help the employees to further on with the treatment that they need. Again, once you get to the psychiatrist and the psychologist level, sometimes medications have to be administered, and we cannot do that in EAP. That's outside of our scope.
So it sounds like, depending on what health plan you have through Optima, whether it's coinsurance or copay, you'll be connected with a counselor who is already a part of the network.
Yes, they've already been paneled, credentialed, the whole 9 yards. Everything that they need to do is already done. So it's just a matter of getting the employee connected.
All right, so kind of switching gears a little bit. I know there are sometimes things that you need assistance with, maybe not, speaking to a counselor per se, but something you are going through in life and you just need some more information on. Like my son's surgery, I needed to watch a video on how that worked. Where do we have any additional resources that employees can access that type of thing?
Yes, we have the website. That gets me all excited. But our website is optimaeap.com. The username to get in is Virginia Beach.
Okay.
When you go out there, Miranda, there are articles, there are webinars, there are seminars, all kinds of information. We have a search box where you can key in one word like resiliency, and it will pull up so many articles for you to read. I admit sometimes people may not need to talk to a clinician. Have you ever been in a situation where you can just read an article and it just kind of puts you into the mode where you need to be? And that's where the employees can find out several different articles out there. If you want to know more about our team, about Optima EAP, we have pictures out there. We have a COVID resource center. Oh my goodness. If you want to go out there and find out anything about COVID and staff and schools, their thoughts of the week that we send out every Monday morning, they go back at least 2 years. Then on our website, there's a tile for training, there's one for Worklife, there's one for legal, there's one for finance. So you click behind those tiles and you'll find several articles out there also, which then leads me into the new benefit that we have effective January 1st, and it's a work-life benefit.
All right.
You go out there to the work-life tile, you click on Access It Online. It takes you into a whole world of access. There's information out there about legal financial identity. There's information about work-life services. And the cool thing is that now you're able to talk to a consultant. So if I wanted to plan a wedding and I needed resources, I can make that. You still call the 1-800 number. You'll be warm transferred over, and then the consultant there will give you all of the resources that you need.
Okay, so if you had a work-life service need, you could call the 1-800 number, and then depending on what services you're looking for, they would connect you with. That is good to know.
And you can talk to the consultant. That's actually somebody that you can talk to. But the legal, financial, and the work-life services, under the work-life becomes financial assist. If you need information on debt, buying a home, wills, things like that. The legal financial is if your identity is ever stolen. You hear horror stories all the time. It's hard, if somebody steals my identity, it's hard for me to get me back. And so there are consultants that you can talk to about that. And then the legal part, you have 30 minutes to actually talk to an attorney. So it's worth its weight in gold.
And you access that through the 1-800 number as well.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
This is great stuff. I know we were talking about managers being able to call that 1-800 number as well to get advice on a situation. Do managers have any other resources that they can access?
There's a manager's toolkit right there, once again, on the website. Out there, you will find the forms that you need for referrals. The voluntary referral is the one where the employee kind of calls themselves. The informal one is just a little reminder, don't forget. But a mandatory referral, there's paperwork that has to be completed, and it's pretty detailed. So they can go out there, they can either submit the paperwork online. There's information out there about the do's and don'ts. The biggest thing we tell the employees or the employers, let our clinicians do the job. Okay, don't try to do an assessment. And then just we ask that all referrals go through our EAP clinical manager first for a consultation.
Right, so the managers can find the paperwork they need and
Yes.
also, a list of maybe what is helpful in those situations and what is maybe less helpful. That's good to know. So I've been on the website and I love it. I love how accessible the information is. What if maybe you're not quite as tech savvy or you're having a really hard time finding maybe something on a specific topic? What options would a person have?
You know what? We have so many articles. Our communications has a lot of articles and flyers that can be used. If the employee would just call into the 1-800 number, and then our operations team will send me an email, and then I can quickly get that information to them.
You touched on it a little bit already. If an employee were to have, or a member of their household, have a concern that fell outside of the EAP umbrella of services that they could provide, what would happen in that situation?
Okay, keeping in mind that EAP is for short-term, solution-focused type challenges and concerns. It may be a point where the clinician, visit number 2, the clinician does an assessment and they determine, you know what, this is outside of the scope of EAP, and we need to refer you on to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. Because at that time, sometimes, Miranda, medications have to be administered, and we don't do medications in EAP. Okay. So again, it's pretty much up to the clinician to do the assessment to determine, hey, do you continue on with the 5 visits, or do we need to get you where you need to be?
Right. All right, last question for today. I know you mentioned earlier that Optima EAP does respond and plays a role in critical incident response.
Yes.
What happens? So once the supervisor has reached out and made those arrangements, what does that look like for the employees?
Well, a lot of times what will happen is the clinical manager then makes an assessment. He'll ask questions from the manager and ask, do you need one-on-one or do you need group sessions? And at that point, the employees are more than welcome to participate. A lot of times, like I said, there may be an employee that passed away, and so group sessions are good for that. So again, you can do a one-on-one or you can do a group.
So in addition to all that we talked about today, is there anything else, Suzanne, that you feel like our listeners should know about Optima EAP?
Well, even though it's about Optima EAP, my biggest thing is encouraging people to be nice to one another. Be kind to one another, because you don't know when somebody is going through something. And one of my famous sayings is, if you see somebody going through something, say something. And if they say something to you, please listen and encourage them to use Optima EAP. Just in summation, they have 5 visits with our clinicians, not only for the employee, but for them and their household. And it's just a wonderful way to kind of talk through some of the things that you're going through in life. Again, short-term, solution-focused. We're here for you.
Thanks again for being our guest today and talking through the ins and outs of the EAP program. We hope today's discussion is helpful in removing any roadblocks that may have been there before for our employees and members of their household to reach out and receive these services, or even just awareness about the website and all the great resources that are available 24/7 through that resource. Optima EAP is available to come on site and give employee orientations to review this information and so much more about how to access EAP services and to give an overview to the employees at your site. If you're interested, reach out to your supervisor and they can scan this QR code to submit their request. In addition to today's discussion, we'd like to remind you of the resources available for city and school employees.
If you or someone you know is in crisis, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 988 and speak with a skilled, trained counselor at a crisis center in your area, anytime 24/7. Virginia Beach City and school employees are encouraged to contact their Employee Assistance Program through Optima EAP for short-term counseling and a wide array of work-life services that can help you balance the many tasks you may have. Call them at 757-363-6777 or 1-800-899-8174. Or you can go to their website at optimaeap.com using the company username Virginia Beach. Work-life services are available on the Optima EAP website, and enhanced services can be accessed at the URL on the screen. Instructions for creating an account are on the webpage. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Life's a Beach, a forum for VB city and school staff to hear and participate in everyday discussions about how we're thinking, feeling, and doing. Speaking of city and school staff, we'd love to hear from you. Please fill out our mental and emotional health topics survey and let us know what you want to hear about in the future. You'll find the link in the description for this episode. And please remember to like this episode and subscribe to our VB Benefits YouTube channel. Just click that button. You could do it. We believe in you.